All right, folks, there's only so far my criminal justice minor from Rutgers University can take us to break down legal news. So we got to turn to the expert, the big boy, the senior legal analyst over at CNN, former DOJ prosecutor. He's got tons of books out there, hosted the Third Degree podcast, our buddy Elie Honig. Elie, thanks for hopping on the podcast with me.
So it's great to see you, Mike. I have to tell your audience a story of when we met in person. So I had done this podcast with you a couple times, but never met you in person. And I'm walking through the Chicago airport 2 or 3 months ago, maybe. And you stopped me and I recognized you. And you, as a true loyal son of Rutgers, were wearing Rutgers garb. I was caught straying. I was wearing a shirt that I will say in my defense is very, very comfortable that my daughter had got for me when she was on a trip from another university that we used to compete with back when we were in the Big East. Should I say? I'm so embarrassed.
No, don't say it.
I put it in. It was a Georgetown shirt. I posted something on Instagram, like at least one of us is loyal to Fair Rutgers.
That's right. I always will be loyal to, as a proud son on the banks of the old Racketeering there. All right, now, Elie, let's get into why you got your degree from there and why we turn to you now to break down news. I want to ask you real quick before I actually get into the Georgia indictments, the former president overall, these 4 cases. I've been seeing you so much on TV, breaking it down from a calendar perspective, what he's going to be facing. But for you, as a former DOJ official, how do you feel when you first saw the indictment news break in Georgia? Now that you've had about a week to kind of digest everything, you weren't awake till midnight reading all the charges. You've been very vocal about Fani Willis. Maybe you should not even look to pursue this because this is kind of covered in Jack Smith's indictment about the 1-6 stuff. What do you make overall of the Georgia indictments as we're about to break it down in a sec?
I think they're a powerful statement by Fani Willis. I think the indictment alleges a lot of conduct that probably is criminal. It's an awkward fit for some of the Georgia laws. I understand why in a vacuum she would bring this case, but I do stand by my argument that you alluded to, which is I'm not sure I see the necessity in the broader sense, because Jack Smith of DOJ has already charged the effort to steal the election in 7 states, including Georgia and beyond. And there's really not much that's new or different in Fani Willis's indictment. Yes, she's charging state law. He charged federal laws. And, I'm going to articulate what the other side says. People say, well, Fani Willis has a right and a duty and an obligation to charge violations of state law. And I say, yes. But prosecutors also do have a lot of discretion. And one of the written policies of DOJ is we try not to pile on. There's a policy at DOJ called the Pettit policy that says if a certain person has already been charged for conduct, substantially the same conduct in another jurisdiction, generally speaking, we're not going to add on our own charges because prosecutorial discretion and a general sense of fair play. It's not an absolute rule, but it's a general practice, and I think a good one. I think in a normal case, let's take it out of the Trump, let's take it out of the political context. Let's just say a normal person was charged with drug trafficking in the state. And then the feds piled on, or vice versa. What if the feds charged somebody with drug trafficking, and then the state said, we're going to charge them with the same drug trafficking? You'd go, why? How's that a good use of resources? How's that fair? The other point that people say is, well, but Fani Willis's charges can't be pardoned, right? Federal charges, if Donald Trump wins or another Republican wins, they can pardon it, or try to at least. I guess there's a question mark whether a president can pardon himself. But Fani Willis's state-level charges can't be pardoned. But I wrote a piece this weekend where I basically said, I'm not so sure it's prosecutors' business to worry about pardons and try to foil pardons. That's the chief executive's job under the Constitution. So I do have my reservations about Fani Willis's indictment. And, if you're all for it, I guess a lot of this comes down to where are you coming from. If your position is Trump just needs to be crushed no matter what, no matter how, then sure. And by the way, by that logic, then also state and county level prosecutors in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada, they should all be piling on their charges too. I think that's fairly ridiculous. Again, prosecutors shouldn't just engage in massive pile-ons. Where I tend to approach this is I absolutely believe Donald Trump needs to be held accountable. And I think the indictments that we saw from Jack Smith are well supported, both of them. But I also I'm not on board with let's crush this guy by any means necessary. Let's bend the normal practices. Let's do things the way we wouldn't normally do them because it's him. And it needs to. And it's so important that he be, what do you hear people say? He has to be held accountable. Yes, but he has to be held accountable within our normal rules and due process.
Yeah, I agree with that. So Elie, let's stay on it because what has stood out from the in Georgia indictment, specifically in the charges, 18 people charged in this, obviously former attorneys of his from Jenna Ellis, Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, the fact that this case took so long, like what has really stood out? And can you kind of break down the charges and Georgia's RICO statute, which again, I am not familiar with as a criminal justice minor?
The breadth of this indictment is what jumps out at me. The fact that she's charged, is it 19 people, 41 charges? Racketeering is a tool that I used to use all the time as a federal prosecutor. It's similar in Georgia, but it enables you to prove, basically you have to prove to the jury this was an ongoing criminal enterprise. This was a group of people working together to commit a series of crimes. The downside is you have to do extra work as a prosecutor. It makes your case more sprawling. Takes longer to prove, can be more complicated. The upside is you get to show the jury the full extent of the criminality here, and there can be a real benefit to that. Hang on, sorry. I'll just say that again, just in case you want to.
Yeah, no worries.
The benefit to that is you get to show the jury the full extent of the criminality. I do think this charge will ultimately prove out to be overbroad. I don't think she's going to wind up with 19 convictions. Let's put aside Trump. I do think it's hard to identify what exact conduct some of these folks engaged in that's not just bad or disloyal or disreputable, but criminal. Take Jenna Ellis, for example, right? Jenna Ellis, the attorney. I'm no fan or admirer of hers as a lawyer. I think she's a terrible lawyer. I think she was dishonest. I have all sorts of problems with her. I'm not so sure she did anything criminal here. She engaged in atrocious lawyering, and she really pushed the boundaries of what a lawyer can ethically do. But did she commit a crime that requires her to lose her liberty and be locked up behind bars? I'm not so sure of that. So, the indictment is sort of the easy part, relatively speaking. Any prosecutor realistically can indict just about anything. I said at the prosecutor's office, we used to say, we don't go out to celebrate an indictment. We go out to celebrate a conviction. So, the other thing here is I don't think we're going to see these charges tried under any circumstances before the 2024 election. People have I was shocked to learn just how slow the Georgia courts move, just how slowly a trial moves. I mean, Fani Willis has a different RICO case right now with far less known people than Donald Trump. Everyone's less known than Donald Trump. They are in month 7 of jury selection. So, I mean, how long is it going to take to pick a jury in this case, to try this case? It's going to take years. And of course, if Trump wins, all bets are off. I don't think any of these cases proceed if he wins the presidency. So she got a big bang for the buck from the initial indictment and announcement, but now the work begins.
Elie, we've had so many different legal analysts on here, like breaking down as each indictment has broken. So now we got 4 cases. We got 91 total charges, felonies and misdemeanors across the board. I would love for you, because we had you, when you were doing your book tour, we had you kind of rank which cases would keep you up at night if you were the former president. Well, now they're all here. Now we have everything all laid out. Can you kind of rank them in terms of crimes, the jury pools that are made up in these different jurisdictions, ones that could take the longest, like you just said, versus the shortest? Like if you're advising the former president, or even if you sat in the prosecutor's chair, like which ones are the ones that this shouldn't take that long? We should get through this. And then which ones are you like, this is going to take forever, like you just said about the Georgia courts?
The 2 federal indictments would be the biggest concern to me if I was in Donald Trump's lawyer's shoes. The New York indictment, the first one, the hush money case, I mean, it's scheduled for trial in March. I don't think it's actually going to go forward. The DA there, Alvin Bragg, who I always have to say just as a qualifier, as a friend of mine, he has signaled publicly that he's willing to come off that date if somebody else needs it. Even if Trump's convicted in that case, it's probably not a jail case. So that one, the conduct is by far the least serious here. That would be last place in all respects in terms of how concerned I am. I think this Fani Willis indictment would be in 3rd place because I would be a little worried about the breadth and scope and seriousness of the charges, but I just think he can put it off for a long time. I think it's going to be certainly not tried before the election. And there's a constitutional issue which is playing out right now about whether, as a DA, she even has the constitutional authority to charge him. The two Jack Smith cases are I think the most serious threats. The conundrum there is the most straightforward fact pattern to me is the documents case, the Mar-a-Lago case. That's the strongest facts. You can readily understand what the crime is there. Whereas I think the January 6th case is an interesting theory. I think there's some wiggle room because it doesn't. I do think Jack Smith makes a compelling case that this is a crime, but it's not the kind of obvious, intuitive crime that we're used to. But here's the conundrum. Florida has the best facts, but also a potentially problematic jury pool for prosecutors because Donald Trump won the state of Florida. Even if the pool is selected from the southern counties in Florida, he got 45% in those states. So you're in all likelihood going to have, I don't know, 3 to 7 Trump voters on your jury. And yes, juries are instructed you're to put aside your political beliefs and all that. But having anyone who stood in front of a jury will tell you they're just human beings and they're not going to decide this case like robots, especially in a couple months leading up to the election. And then you have the Jack Smith DC indictment, which I think is also not quite as clear on its facts, but I think the jury pool there is going to be fantastic for Jack Smith. Donald Trump got 5% of the vote in DC in 2020, 5%. So it's no wonder he and his lawyers have talked about trying to get out of there. I don't think they'll be able to. But so to me, if you gave me the choice of great facts and a so-so jury pool, or so-so facts and a great jury pool, I'll take the jury pool. I mean, that's the reality of trying cases in court. So those are the two that worry me. I also think that if I'm Trump's lawyers, those are also the two that I think are most likely to get tried before the election.
Quick break from our pod to tell you about a new pod at Fresh Roasted Coffee, Envy Pods. So if you go to freshroastedcoffee.com, my partner's shaking his head. That's a good transition. Are you kidding me?
It was good. No, I shook my head. I was like, that's brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because I saw this picture earlier. I was like, I saw what you're doing.
It is pretty good. That's right. So listen, the new Envy Pods over at freshroastedcoffee.com, the official sponsor of Can We Please Talk, environmentally safe, compostable. You can go check these out at freshroastedcoffee.com. When you open up the package, it smells delicious. I'm telling you, you can't smell it on here, but I promise you that when I opened this morning to make my cup of coffee, it was delicious. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com today. Use the promo code CANWEGET20 for 20% off your first order, or hit the link in our show details. Well, I live in that jury pool here in Florida, so there's a potential for me to get selected for that. More on that, folks. Stay tuned just in case I do. Elie, somebody that's been the ire of Elie Honig, and you've written a book about this man, former Attorney General Bill Barr, said something recently on Fox News that I want to play for you and get your reaction, because you just alluded to it before about prosecutors. They shouldn't be thinking about pardon-proofing their cases. You said that last week on the Third Degree podcast. I want you to take a listen to what Bill Barr said recently on Fox News about if he's comfortable with the former president, if he's found guilty of these, the former president sitting in a jail cell, what it means to America. Take a listen to this.
I think the chances are that he will be convicted on some counts. And
can you see him doing jail time?
But I don't think that translates into jail time.
Why?
Because I think, if I was Attorney General and we were prosecuting, for example, on the documents case, which is a righteous case, I wouldn't want to see a former president in jail. I think a very substantial penalty would serve the public interest, but putting him in jail has too many collateral bad impacts on the country. So I think that's probably where it would end up.
So, Elie, the biggest talking point, again, as somebody who's worked at Fox News, who's put some of this stuff on air, was always about this two-tiered system of justice. And here we have a former attorney general saying that because of who the person is, the former free leader of the world, the former president of the United States, he would have a problem seeing that person in jail. Am I wrong? Is that not a clear-cut example of a two-tiered system of justice? What do you make of the former attorney general's comments there as somebody who's written a book about this man's time for the Department of Justice?
So first of all, I see my book over your right shoulder, Hatchet Man. So thank you for the plug. As much as that book is a harsh critique of Bill Barr's time in office, I actually agree with much, not all, but much of what he has said publicly. I agree with the clip you just played that Trump is likely to be convicted on something. I mean, the guy's got 91 counts against him. I think that in making the argument that Barr is making, he's implicitly conceding that not everyone is treated equal under the law. The starting with the former president, I actually sort of agree with him, but on a different basis. I don't know that I buy. Well, look, I think you cannot ignore the fact that we as Americans don't like the idea, and I write about this in my second book, are a little bit inherently uncomfortable with the idea of putting handcuffs and putting behind bars a former president. It feels un-American. Now, I argue in my book, plenty of other developed democracies have done just that, and they've been fine. But I do think Bill Barr is right that a lot of people would not want to see that. I know there's resistance Twitter, which dreams about it all day long, but I mean real people in the real world. And I don't just mean Trump's most ardent supporters. I think I know people who are of the mindset more or less of, I didn't vote for Trump either time. I would never vote for him. I think he should have been impeached, and I think he should have been removed and convicted in impeachment, but I'm not so sure I love the idea of him being locked up. And that's I think a reasonable opinion. I think anyone who wants to shout that down is out of touch with what real people think and maybe needs to get off of Twitter. Now, I actually think Trump is likely to avoid imprisonment for a different set of reasons, though. First of all, he has to be convicted, of course. You need unanimity. You need all 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt. Then he has to be sentenced to prison, not a guarantee. I think the New York case, for example, he's unlikely to get sentenced to prison. And I think a judge may adopt some of what Bill Barr just said. I don't love, there's ways to punish him. He'll be 80 some years old by then, and short of locking him up, even if he gets sentenced to prison. If he wins the election, forget it. He'll pardon himself. He'll dismiss the cases. There's no way the state cases will proceed while he's in office. Even if he loses, though, he can then appeal. Let's remember, even if there comes a moment where there's a trial conviction, you've got the appeals court sitting back there, including the U.S. Supreme Court. And people get really mad when I say this. I'm not making a prediction here, but we do have a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. I don't think the Supreme Court justices care about Donald Trump. I don't think they like him or feel indebted to him. Maybe a couple of them do, but I do think they probably, many of them feel the same way Bill Barr just articulated about locking up a former president. This has been a Supreme Court that's been very broad on First Amendment and very narrow on construing corruption crimes. You add that all together, it's not inconceivable to me that the Supreme Court may overturn a conviction. I know people don't like to hear that, but I'm just flagging it as a possibility. And even beyond that, this one really gets people worked up. Let's say he gets convicted, sentenced to prison, and the conviction and sentence survive all the levels of appeal. There is the possibility of a commutation by a second-term Joe Biden. Think about it. Again, will he do it? I don't know. I'm not talking about a full pardon. I'm saying a sentencing commutation, meaning your conviction stays in place. I'm just going to reduce your sentence, because by the time this all plays out, Joe Biden, if he wins, will be in his second term. He'll be 84, 85 years old. Trump will be 81, 82 years old. I can see Joe Biden, and I've talked to people who know him who said it's possible, maybe not likely, but possible, that he says, look, I beat this guy twice in an election. His political career is over. He's never going to be president again. He's been convicted. Justice has been done. But for some of the reasons Bill Barr just stated and sort of the moving on type thing, I'm going to knock his sentence down from however many years down to probation or something. So my point is there's 4 or 5 separate hurdles that all have to be overcome in order for him to actually wind up behind bars.
Elie, before we let you go, because you just blew out the follow-up I was going to ask you, because we had Joseph Moreno kind of make a prediction about whether he would see any jail time. And he said the same thing you said, appeals, he'll never serve any actual time while he's in appeals courts. And this could drag on, right? So I want to ask you now, all right, Elie Honig is part of the special counsel team with Jack Smith, or he's back, with the New York Attorney General's office. You were a former state prosecutor in New Jersey. So you're working one of these cases. This gets handed down to you. Are you bringing any of these charges across these 4 different jurisdictions? Now that you've seen all the charges, you said how tough they are legally to prove. Does Elie Honig sign off on any of these and says, yes, these are righteous charges, like you heard Bill Barr say, and bring those forward?
Absolutely. The 2 Jack Smith cases, absolutely sign off on the Mar-a-Lago charges, the classified documents charges, and the obstruction, and absolutely sign off on we call it January 6th, but it's really more about the conspiracy before January 6th. But the 2020 election charges, I think they're well crafted. I think they're well supported in the evidence. I think they're necessary. I think they're not duplicative or an overuse of prosecutorial power. standing alone. So yeah, I don't want, don't get me wrong. I think people tend to look at these conversations, Mike, as a little bit of like, but who are you rooting for? I actually had someone tweet after I did a segment on CNN the other day, said, I'm really tired of you sometimes supporting Trump's legal view and sometimes not. Pick a side and stick with it. It's like, that is the best compliment I could possibly get, because I don't have a side here. And, what I would urge people to do is let our process play out. I do think these charges are justified, but I also don't think every charge is justified. I don't think it needs to be pile on everything just to bury this guy. I don't think we need to compromise his due process rights in order to get it done. What I'm hoping happens is accountability, but within the existing good faith practices that we have, within our existing procedures, within our existing constitutional rights. Maybe it's like overly naive to think for that, but that's always going to be, my orientation is not going to be, are we going to nail Trump? Or are we going to make excuses for Trump? It's going to be, can we bring him to accountability without undermining our own principles?
One of us took that criminal justice minor and turned it into a major and went through law school. And now he is a senior legal analyst over at CNN and author of 2 books. The other one's the host of this show. Elie Honig, can't thank you enough for coming on the program, my friend. Continued success to you. Stay safe, buddy.
Thanks, Mike. How we feeling about Rutgers football? Optimistic?
We feel good. September 16th. I'll be up there, Elie. I got 2 tickets with your name on it if you want to come.
Which game is that?
That's Virginia Tech.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah. I'll see you there, buddy.
Thanks, Mike.
Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.